Once a devotee asked Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi, can a man who has attained realization move about and act and speak? Bhagwan said, why not? Do you suppose realization means being inert like a stone or becoming nothing? Devotee said, I don't know, but they say that the highest state is withdrawal from all sense activities, thoughts, and experiences. In fact, cessation of activity. Bhagwan said, then how would it differ from deep sleep? Besides, it would be a state which, however exalted, comes and goes and would therefore not be the natural and normal state. So, how could it represent the eternal presence of the Supreme Self, which persists through all states and survives them? It is true that there is such a state, and that in the case of some people it may be necessary to go through it. It may be a temporary phase of the quest, or it may persist to the end of a man's life, if it be the divine will or the man's destiny, but in any case you cannot call it the highest state. If it were, you would have to say that not only the sages but God Himself has not attained the highest state, since not only are the realized sages very active, but the personal God Himself is obviously not in this supremely inactive state, since He presides over the world and directs its activities. Devotee asked, what is samadhi? Bhagwan said, in yoga, the term is used to indicate some kind of trance, and there are various kinds of samadhi. But the samadhi I speak to you about is different. It is a sahaj samadhi. In this state, you remain calm and composed during activity. You realize that you are moved by the deeper real self within and are unaffected by what you do or say or think. You have no worries, anxieties, or cares, for you realize that there is nothing that belongs to you as ego, and that everything is being done by something with which you are in conscious union. After realization, a man may continue a life of worldly activity or he may not. He makes no difference to his state. Visitors said, realized men generally withdraw from active life and abstain from worldly activity. Bhagwan said, they may or they may not. Some, even after realization, carry on trade or business or rule a kingdom. Some withdraw to solitary places and abstain from all activity more than the minimum necessary to keep life in the body. We cannot make any general rule about it. Inability to understand the apparent inactivity of the sage is one of the difficulties of many Western writers, firmly convinced that Christ was mistaken in saying that Mary had chosen the better part. Modern Christians are apt to represent Martha, the outwardly active one, as superior and to criticize the sage for what they consider inaction. When asked by an aspirant whether his realization, if attained, would help others, Bhagwan has been known to reply, yes, and it is the best help you possibly can give them. But then he added, but in fact, there are no others to help. The same paradox is proclaimed in Buddhism, where, for instance, in the Diamond Sutra, after speaking of compassion, the Buddha explains that in reality there are no others to be compassionate to. The Lord Buddha continued, do not think, Sabhuti, that the Tathagata, the Buddha, would consider within himself, I will deliver human beings. That would be a degrading thoughts. Why? Because there are really no sentient beings to be delivered by the Tathagata. Should there be any sentient beings to be delivered by the Tathagata, it would mean that the Tathagata was cherishing within his mind arbitrary conceptions of phenomena such as one's own self, other selves, living beings, and a universal self. Even when the Tathagata refers to himself, he is not holding within his mind any such arbitrary thought. Only terrestrial human beings think of selfhood as being a personal possession. Sabhuti, even the expression terrestrial beings as used by the Tathagata doesn't mean that there are any such beings. It is only used as a figure of speech. People often say that a realized man should go about preaching his message. They ask how a man can remain quiet in realization when there is misery also existing. But what is a realized man? Does he see misery outside himself? They want to determine his state without themselves realizing it. From his standpoint, their contention amounts to this: a man has a dream in which he sees a number of persons. On waking up, he asks, have the people in the dream also woken up? It is ridiculous. Again, some good man says, it doesn't matter even if I don't get realization. Let me be the last man in the world to get it so that I can help all the others to become realized before I do. That is just like the dreamer saying, let all these people in the dream wake up before I do. He would be no more absurd than this amiable philosopher. And yet, paradoxically, the sage is intensely active, although he may apparently be inactive. A saying of Lao Tse from the Tao Te Ching was read out in the hall. By his non action, the sage governs all. Sri Bhagwan remarked, non action is unceasing activity. The sage is characterized by eternal and incessant activity. His stillness is like the apparent stillness of a fast rotating top. It is moving too fast for the eye to see, so it appears to be still. Yet it is rotating, so is the apparent inaction of the sage. This has to be explained because people generally mistake his stillness for inertness. It is not so. Similar to this preoccupation with action with the question of whether the realized man is bound by destiny, really the question has no meaning. His body is bound by destiny, but since he doesn't identify himself with the body, its destiny cannot bind him. Being one with the eternal self within which this body, his life, this world passes like an appearance, he cannot be bound by anything. One morning, a visitor said to Bhagwan, the realized man has no karma, he is not bound by destiny, so why should he still retain a body? Bhagwan said, who asked this question? A realized man or an unrealized man? Why worry about what the realized man does or why he does nothing, anything? Better think about yourself. He was then silent. After a while, however, he explained further, you are under the impression that you are the body, so you think that realized man also has a body. Does he say that he has one? He may seem to you to have one and to do things with it as others do. The charred ashes of a rope look like a rope, but they are of no use to tie anything with. So long as one identifies oneself with the body, all this is hard to understand. That is why it is sometimes said in answer to such questions that the body of the realized man continues to exist until his destiny has worked itself out and then it falls away. An example of this that is sometimes given is that an arrow which has been loosened from the bow destiny must continue its course and hit the mark, even though the animal that stood there has moved away and another has taken its place. Realization has been achieved. But the truth is that the realized man has transcended all destiny and is bound neither by the body nor by its destiny. Equally, beside the point is the question of whether the realized man can feel pain or pleasure, if pleasure then pain also, because the two go together. They are a pair of opposites. The sensation is common both to the realized man and the unrealized man. The difference is that the unrealized man identifies himself with the body that feels it, whereas the realized man knows that all this is self, all this is Brahman. If there is pain, let it be. It is also a part of the self, and the self is perfect. Or whether he can commit sins. The very raising of this question implies failure to understand what is meant by self realization. Sin is the action of the ego or the individual being in its own interest against the universal harmony or the will of God, but where there is no ego, where there is only the universal self, who is to act against whom? An unrealized man sees one who is realized and identifies him with the body because he does not know the self and mistake the body for the self. He extends the same mistake to the body of the realized man. The latter is therefore considered to be the physical form, again the unrealized man, though in fact not the originator of his actions, imagines himself to be so, and he considers the actions of the body as his own actions, and therefore he thinks that the realized man is acting in the same way because his body is active, but the later knows the truth and is not deceived. His state cannot be understood by the unrealized, and therefore the question of his actions troubles the later, although it doesn't arise for himself. All good or divine qualities are included in jnana, spiritual enlightenment, and all bad or sanatic qualities in spiritual darkness. When jnana comes, all ajnana goes, and that all divine qualities come automatically. If a man is a jnani, he cannot utter lies or commit any sin. The saying that there is no ego or that the mind is dead sometimes lead to misunderstandings. What is meant is simply that the mind or ego as apparent creator or originator of policies, plans and ideas is dead. Understanding remains and pure radiant consciousness. Hari Om Tat Sat.